Vanessa lived her life in square footage and marble finishes. As a top-tier real estate agent in the city, she spent her days selling dreams to the ultra-wealthy, and her nights resentfully returning to a home she considered beneath her. Her husband, Marcus, was a man of quiet passions. He had spent 15 years teaching history at the local public high school, earning a salary that Vanessa openly mocked during their rare, tense dinners. She saw him as a relic, a man content with old books and a 10-year-old sedan, while she craved the glitz of the penthouses she showed to strangers. To Vanessa, Marcus's low income was a personal insult. She felt she was the sole engine of their social mobility, working late into the night to maintain an image of success that Marcus seemed indifferent to. She began to view him as a financial anchor, dragging her down when she should be soaring with the elite. This resentment eventually found a target: Julian, a ruthless billionaire developer who viewed Marcus with the same contempt. Vanessa didn't just start an affair with Julian. She started a project. She began to funnel her high commission checks into private accounts, while convincing Marcus to use his small savings to pay for the mundane costs of their lives: groceries, utilities, and the mortgage on their suburban house. Vanessa was a master of the long game. She spent 2 years preparing for her exit, ensuring that every asset of value was either in her name or tied up in business entities Marcus didn't understand. She saw him as academically brilliant but financially illiterate, a man who understood the fall of Rome but couldn't read a modern balance sheet. She treated him with a cold, patronizing kindness, waiting for the moment when her secret new life fund reached a specific number. What Vanessa failed to realize was that Marcus's choice to teach wasn't born of necessity, but of freedom. She had never bothered to ask why a poor teacher owned their home outright within 5 years of marriage, or why his old books were occasionally appraised by international auction houses. She was so blinded by the numbers on his monthly paycheck that she never looked at the names on the deeds of the historic district's most valuable timberlands. The hook was set on a rainy Tuesday evening. Vanessa arrived home and, without even taking off her designer coat, handed Marcus a thick envelope. She told him, with a voice devoid of emotion, that she was tired of carrying the weight of his mediocrity. She filed for divorce, claiming that his lack of financial contribution had created an irreparable rift. She offered him the old car and a small cash payout, demanding he vacate the house within 48 hours. She smiled, thinking she was finally cutting the anchor. She didn't realize that by filing for divorce, she had just triggered a mandatory financial disclosure that would reveal the one thing she never expected. Marcus wasn't her dependent. He was the landlord of the very office she worked in. The 48 hours Vanessa had given Marcus to vacate the house passed with an eerie, unsettling silence. She spent the weekend with Julian, celebrating her liberation on his yacht, sipping vintage champagne and mocking Marcus's inevitable struggle to find a studio apartment on a teacher's budget. She envisioned him moving into a cramped, dusty flat, surrounded by his worthless history books. In her mind, she had already won. She had the legal momentum, the superior income, and a billionaire partner. She was prepared for a fight over the modest suburban house. But she wasn't prepared for the discovery that the house was merely a footnote in a much larger ledger. On Monday morning, Vanessa marched into the preliminary financial hearing with the confidence of a predator. She had hired an aggressive shark of a lawyer named Silas, whose only goal was to paint Marcus as a financial parasite. Silas began the session by presenting a meticulously crafted chart of Vanessa's commissions over the last 5 years, contrasting them against Marcus's flat, unmoving salary. He argued that Vanessa had provided 85% of the marital value and that Marcus should be entitled to nothing more than a small severance from the life she had built. Marcus sat across the table, wearing the same tweed jacket he wore to school. Beside him was an elderly man in a charcoal suit who didn't look like a divorce lawyer. He looked like a librarian. His name was Mr. Sterling, and he had been the family counselor for the Marcus's lineage for 3 generations. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he didn't argue. He didn't defend his career or his salary. He simply slid a single, leather-bound folder toward the judge. My client accepts the premise that our incomes were unequal, Mr. Sterling said, his voice as dry as parchment. However, the petitioner has made a grave error in her definition of assets. She has spent 2 years hiding her commissions in offshore accounts, specifically the V Horizon Fund, which we have already traced. But more importantly, she has failed to account for the Lowell Timber and Heritage Trust, of which my client is the sole beneficiary. As the judge began to flip through the documents, the color drained from Vanessa's face. The folder didn't contain pay stubs from the Board of Education. It contained deeds to 18,000 acres of prime timber land, mineral rights in 3 states, and the majority share of the Heritage Square Commercial District, the very district where Vanessa's real estate agency was headquartered. Marcus hadn't been living off her. He had been living on a tiny fraction of the interest from a fortune so vast it made Julian's billionaire status look like a middle management portfolio. The room fell into a suffocating silence as the judge read aloud the valuation of the trust. It was in the high 9 figures. Vanessa's secret fund of $2 million, which she had worked so hard to steal, was a rounding error in Marcus's world. Because Vanessa had filed for divorce on the grounds of financial incompatibility and had attempted to hide her own assets, she had triggered a bad faith clause in the state's marital property laws. Mr. Lowell, the judge said, looking at Marcus with newfound curiosity, your filings indicate that the suburban home, the art collection, and even the office building where the petitioner works are all held by this trust. Is that correct? Marcus nodded slowly. He explained that he taught history because he loved the truth, not because he needed the money. He had kept the wealth quiet because he wanted a partner who loved the man, not the balance sheet. Vanessa had failed that test. The hook was the realization that by filing first and lying about her income, Vanessa had effectively locked herself out of the equitable distribution of the trust. In many jurisdictions, premarital trusts are protected, but the increase in value during the marriage can be contested. However, because Marcus had used trust dividends to pay off the mortgage on the house she lived in, and because she had attempted to defraud the court by hiding her commissions, the judge was now legally inclined to grant her exactly what she had asked for. A clean break. Vanessa realized with a jolt of horror that a clean break meant she would leave with her hidden commissions, which were now subject to heavy fines and taxes and nothing else. She wouldn't get the house. She wouldn't get the mediocre husband's support. And most importantly, she realized that the building, where she worked, the source of her status, was owned by the man she had just called a financial anchor. Vanessa's exit from the courthouse was not the triumphant stroll she had envisioned. The designer air of the hallway felt thin, and the weight of her secret V Horizon account felt less like a safety net and more like an anchor. She immediately sought refuge in Julian's glass-walled office, the pinnacle of the city's skyline, expecting him to laugh off the revelation of Marcus's wealth. She expected him to use his billionaire influence to crush the history teacher in the higher courts. Instead, she found Julian staring out the window at the Heritage Square district with a look of profound calculation. When she began to complain about Marcus's deception, Julian didn't comfort her. He didn't even turn around. He simply slid a digital tablet across his desk. On the screen was a commercial lease agreement for his flagship development project, the very land he needed to secure his legacy. The owner of the land wasn't a faceless corporation. It was a subsidiary of the Lowell Heritage Trust. Do you have any idea what you've done, Vanessa? Julian's voice was cold, stripped of the flirtatious warmth he had used to seduce her. I have been negotiating for 3 years to buy the air rights over Heritage Square. I needed the owner to be a quiet, passive entity. Now, because of your financial incompatibility claim, you've dragged this trust into the public spotlight. You've turned my landlord into an adversary. The realization hit Vanessa like a physical blow. Julian's attraction to her had always been flavored by her access to the local real estate market, but his primary loyalty was to his balance sheet. He informed her that Marcus's lawyers had already sent a notice of non-renewal for the ground lease on Julian's newest construction site. By suing Marcus and attempting to paint him as a failure, Vanessa had inadvertently given Marcus the legal just cause to scrutinize every business interaction involving his trust and anyone associated with his wife. The hook was the sudden brutal shift in Julian's demeanor. He wasn't just distancing himself. He was protecting his empire. He told Vanessa that their association was now a liability. If he continued to see her, it would look like a conspiracy to defraud the Lowell Trust, which would give Marcus's legal team grounds to pierce Julian's corporate veil. In a single afternoon, the billionaire, who was supposed to be her upgrade, turned into a stranger who wouldn't even offer her a ride home. Vanessa returned to the suburban house she had tried to kick Marcus out of, only to find the locks had been changed. A professional security team stood at the perimeter. They didn't use force. They simply presented a court-ordered injunction against waste, because Vanessa had admitted to hiding marital funds and was currently being investigated for financial fraud. The court had granted Marcus's request to seal the residence to protect the historical assets within, specifically his collection of rare books and artifacts, which were now valued at more than the house itself. Vanessa sat in her car, watching the sun set over the neighborhood she had once deemed mediocre. She checked her phone. Her real estate agency had sent an urgent internal memo. Her access to the company's listing database had been suspended pending an investigation into her off-book commissions. The building's owner, the Lowell Trust, had requested an audit of all agent activities within the premises. Marcus wasn't just taking the house. He was systematically deactivating every part of her professional identity. The woman who had measured Marcus by his paycheck was now discovering the true definition of net worth. Marcus didn't need to shout, and he didn't need to fight for the house. He was simply withdrawing the support system she had never realized he provided. She was left with a frozen offshore account, a lover who viewed her as a toxic asset, and the terrifying realization that the poor teacher she had mocked actually held the deed to her entire future. Desperation is a powerful hallucinogen. Sitting in a cramped motel room, the only place her dwindling cash could afford, Vanessa convinced herself she still had one card to play. During their marriage, she had once stumbled upon a locked trunk in Marcus's basement study. Inside, she had seen old, handwritten ledgers and correspondence from the early 1900s that seemed to suggest the Lowell family's timber trust had acquired its land through questionable political maneuvers and forced sales during the Great Depression. She believed this was the hidden rot in Marcus's foundation. In her mind, the threat of a public scandal, one that could tarnish the Lowell Heritage Trust and trigger a state investigation, would force Marcus to settle for millions. She didn't want the house anymore. She wanted a payout that would restore her status in Julian's eyes. She spent the night scanning her memory and the few photos she had surreptitiously taken of the documents, preparing her scorched earth ultimatum. The meeting took place in the neutral territory of a high-end hotel lobby. Marcus arrived alone, looking as unbothered as ever in a simple corduroy blazer. Vanessa didn't waste time with pleasantries. She leaned across the table and laid out her discovery. She spoke of historical reparations, unethical land grabs, and the public shame that would follow if she leaked the documents to the city's largest investigative newspaper. She demanded $50 million and the immediate lifting of the audit on her real estate agency. "Your family's integrity is a lie, Marcus," she hissed, her eyes bright with a frantic hope. "I'll bury the Lowell name under a century of scandal." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't look worried. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin, modern tablet. He opened a digitized archive and turned it toward her. It was a formal certificate of historical indemnity and restitution issued by the state government 10 years ago. "Vanessa, I'm a history teacher," Marcus said quietly. "Did you really think I hadn't studied my own family's past? 10 years ago, long before I met you, I discovered those same ledgers. I spent for years and a significant portion of the trust's income working with the state and the descendants of those affected to rectify those very land disputes. We returned 3,000 acres and established a perpetual scholarship fund for the families involved. The hook was the absolute transparency of his defense. Marcus hadn't hidden the scandal. He had already solved it. The documents Vanessa thought were blackmail were actually the records of a closed case, a historical debt that had already been paid in full. By bringing it up, she wasn't exposing a secret. She was proving that she had never truly known her husband's character. She had spent their marriage looking for a price tag on his soul, while he had been quietly cleaning the stains off his family's honor. The newspaper already has these files. Vanessa, Marcus continued. They wrote a 3-part series on the Lowell restitution 5 years ago. It won a local journalism award. You would have known that if you read anything other than the luxury real estate listings. The final blow came when Marcus's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, stepped out from behind a nearby pillar. He wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to serve her with a criminal harassment and extortion warning, because she had attempted to use confidential family documents which she had accessed by breaking a locked trunk in a private residence to demand money. She was now on the verge of a felony charge. Vanessa watched Marcus walk away, his pace steady and unhurried. For the first time, she saw the true scale of the walls he had built around his life. They weren't made of money. They were made of truth. Every time she tried to find a crack in his structure, she only found more reinforced steel. She was no longer a real estate power player. She was a woman trying to sell a scandal that had already been settled. While the man she called mediocre continued to shape the history of the city she was about to be exiled from. The Horizon account. The secret offshore fund Vanessa had spent 2 years meticulously filling with stolen commissions became her ultimate cage. As she sat in her motel room, the local news scrolled a headline that made her blood run cold. Federal task force targets offshore ghost accounts in major real estate sweep, because Marcus's audit of the Heritage Square district had flagged the suspicious marketing fees Vanessa had been paying to herself. The IRS had been handed a roadmap to her hidden wealth. The government didn't ask for a meeting. They simply performed a jeopardy assessment. Within hours, the Horizon account was frozen, and a tax lien was placed on every asset Vanessa still possessed, including her designer jewelry and the car she was driving. She went from believing she had a $2 million safety net to having a net worth of zero, plus a massive pending debt to the federal government. On the day the divorce was finalized, the court's decree was a clinical autopsy of her greed. Vanessa was granted nothing from the Lowell Heritage Trust, as it was proven to be separate premarital property. More importantly, the judge ordered that her remaining liquid assets be diverted to Marcus as restitution for the marital funds she had dissipated. She was left with a suitcase, a mountain of legal debt, and a reputation that made her unemployable in the city she once tried to rule. 1 week later, Marcus sent her a message. He didn't want to gloat. He invited her to a small, local park, a piece of land the Lowell Trust had just donated to the city. When she arrived, looking worn and humbled, she found Marcus sitting on a bench, watching a group of his students plant a commemorative oak tree. "I wanted to give you this," Marcus said, handing her a small, old-fashioned key. "It's not to the house. It's to a storage locker in the valley. Inside, you'll find all the things you actually brought into this marriage, your grandmother's quilts, your college photos, and the books you used to read before you started reading bank statements." Vanessa looked at the key, her hands trembling. "You took everything, Marcus. You won." "I didn't take anything, Vanessa," he replied, his voice calm and devoid of malice. "I just stopped paying for the illusion. You wanted a life based on high salaries and billionaire status. Now you have the freedom to go find it. But you'll find that when you strip away the marble and the glass, you're left with the only thing that actually has value, your character, and yours is currently in a deep deficit." As a final act of quiet power, Marcus informed her that the Lowell Trust had purchased the motel where she was staying. He had instructed the manager to allow her to stay for 1 month, rent-free, so she wouldn't be on the street while she looked for a real job, perhaps one that paid a modest salary like his. Vanessa watched him walk away, merging into the crowd of students and teachers. He looked like an ordinary man, a low-salary history teacher in a worn blazer. But as she looked around the park, she realized that every tree, every bench, and the very ground she stood on was part of his legacy. She had spent years trying to trade a diamond for a piece of glass because she didn't know how to look beneath the surface. Marcus wasn't the anchor that held her down. He was the foundation that had kept her from drifting away. Now, she was finally fluid, and she realized with terrifying clarity that she had no idea how to swim.